So I'm just going to stand here for 2 minutes and very briefly summarize some of the main points that we heard about this morning and this afternoon. And then we'll open it up first to our speakers and then ultimately to the audience. So Ana Maria this morning encouraged us, and where is she? Is she here? So Ana Maria, anyways, encouraged us to think about the continent's history and the role that both resistance and hybridization have played in this history. I think we touched upon that again this afternoon, also through Fabiola's talk in a way. Ana Maria talked about how the South American continent has been the hinterland to first Europe, then the US, and finally today China, and how the recognition of this history can productively maybe inform future projects. She also showed us that in a number of cases the built environment can indeed be a motor or catalyst for new trusting relationships among people, something that then Diana also stressed when she presented to us her projects that sit between a grassroots activism on the one hand and a more conventional design practice on the other. I could also see in Diana's projects an understanding of the landscape architect not only as a designer, but also as an activist, but also as a mediator in ways, I thought. So a mediator between different parts of the landscape, between the urban on the one hand and the rural on the other hand, but more importantly, perhaps between the various interest groups and people that live on the land, regardless of whether in or outside of cities. Jeanette not only drew our attention to even larger scales, those of the vast open pit mining areas in parts of Chile and the constantly growing and shifting urban settlements that they elicit, but also to the fact that landscape can indeed be used as a regulator of sorts. So, a question that came up for me was, can landscape design be an instigator to inspire politicians and policymakers to prevent rampant, careless construction, and can it indeed lead to legislative reforms or new legislation, let's say, that conserves and protect sensitive areas and through this then enable healthier lives and lifestyles. Teresa presented us with a range of different projects that all are exemplary in so many ways, letting form follow function with minimal intervention, and in some cases merely extracting rather than adding materials to a site. So in this way, she creates landscapes that we would probably all agree are simply beautiful, to be minimal in this description with words as well. So she reminded us about how important it is to study and understand the essence of a site to create a meaningful place. And so Fabiola took us deep into the history of Rio de Janeiro at one certain point in time and explained to us how architecture, and I'm quoting her here, architecture was used as a eugenic technology, a field that really has not been studied almost, I would say, at all in relationship to architecture and the built environment. So looking very closely at these relationships between medicine, medical history, and the built environment. And Loretta and Elena then took us into the water history, the hydrology of Mexico City, and quite intriguingly, I thought, made the point that today we, first of all, have to be really interdisciplinary in our thinking, in our activities, in our work. And they also both showed that how in the case of UNAM, maybe in particular in Mexico City, in particular the academy and what is going on at the university perhaps can indeed legitimize new policy decisions, and can show how landscape can make policy in the first place. So I thought that was a really interesting thought, and the way kind of you were able to show that in your projects. And and Marta very intriguingly showed us how not only women are at the forefront of a lot of the landscape activities, but her international work really showed us that landscape is a lot about hope, and that maybe in a lot of Latin American countries, and this is a question again, I think, for all of you, landscape is one of the big, important professions of the future in whatever capacity you want to kind of frame landscape here. So again, thank you very much, and the word is all yours, I think. We would also like to invite you to maybe, if you yourselves have any questions to the participants, to the other speakers, to take over.
It sounds okay, yes. I just would like to ask you, students, to become enrolled in global level, to act locally, but to understand that beyond American Society of Landscape Architects is an international federation of landscape architects where you can become part of this journey. Because what I think and seen in United States of America is that you have the most prestigious faculties, universities, but you have to go beyond borders. And you have to come to South and to think and to work and to understand that the world we have and the place is full of knowledge, of traditional knowledge. So conclude that please come to join us.
I think the question you raised about if landscape is a profession of the future, or how do we see the future of landscape, I think it's really relevant, because the way in which we are trying to turn how we design cities and how cities develop has a lot to deal with the context in which these cities are built. And dealing with the context, with the natural context, strictly puts you to have to talk about landscape. So I do think it's somehow the way in which projects for cities or from my point of view, because I'm an urban designer, have to be somehow framed in a landscape point of view or from a landscape point of view. So I see a lot of future in that sense, no? And it's something we were talking about before, no? About it's not only that, because we architects are always thinking about how you do things for the future, and you not many times think about the past, no? And when you start understanding how cities have been structured like for millions of years or thousands of years, then you start understanding how landscape has always been really important and really present in how cities and how humans understand the natural context and make an environment possible for them to develop. No?
Let me see if this works, yeah. I just wanted to add a little bit more in terms of what Loretta just said, and I think landscape has this way, at least in Latin America, to seep through the cracks somehow. So what it can provide to projects in Latin America has become very relevant because of that, because it just fills in the holes that are left by other disciplines somehow. And so I think it's a great opportunity, but also to think that maybe we shouldn't be thinking just in terms of which discipline does best in the future, but rather how we can start to talk between disciplines, even if we're not formed under that discipline itself. I just think that we need to figure out, particularly in the context of Latin America, how to operate collaboratively. And it's not easy. So, yeah, I should say just not to think in terms of disciplines themselves, but what they can put on the table and how we can use them to address, we were just saying, complex problems, because complex problems do require interdisciplinarity, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
I want to complement what you're saying, because I was thinking about the conclusions that you made, and I don't think about its disciplines itself. I think the society is tired of these aesthetics of pain and inequity that we have in Latin America, and we want to do a different way. No, we have been resolving the things in a way that all of young people, we are thinking about how we can change that inertia, no? So I think we have to dissolve our disciplines, no? Not like this and this and this, no? Not this. It's just, we are in just one proposal that we want to change the way we are doing things, and we need to understand the other disciplines and how they manage some things. But I think it's not about the. I am very happy to do it about the landscape, but I think I am lack in many of knowledge I want to know. So I think we have to go through, as you said, no, in history we have to go through, because whatever the path is giving you the answer to go for the solution or a strategy.
Yes. What I found very interesting about the organization of this conference and all the conversation we had today is also how much we use the word landscape and the many meanings we give to it, whether it is a concept, a tool, a strategy, a discipline, etc. And the truth is that is one of the things I find the most interesting about landscape. I find that this is very rich as a concept for designers, besides being a practice. And I don't know, throughout my work, one day I adopted one definition, another day another one day one more related to the European context, sometimes North American or South American. And I think this is very important also in our work. And lately, especially because of working in the Latin American context, which I don't know so deeply in terms of defining, in order to understand like this true meaning of landscape, if it really exists. So I have kind of adopted the definition of an Italian geographer that defines landscape as the results of the dynamic, genetic, and functional relations between a site and the organisms that live on top of it. And I think that if we understand this historically and project it to the future, like, it's a very powerful concept to imagine how, as designers, so if this is a concept, and if as designers we can a bit manipulate, no? Think that we can change these relations in a way that they are more equal, that they are preserving the future, the survival of all these organisms and so on. Yes, then it makes it like the discipline of the future. I mean, I don't think there is many other disciplines that can provide such a broad understanding.
What role do you think the scarcity and austerity play in the work in Latin America in particular? I was wondering, well, to anybody actually, what a scarcity. So this, I think we heard earlier in the morning, somebody was saying, I can't remember now, but a number of you actually were alluding to the scarcity of materials or just opportunities, right? Or budgets or funds. So scarcity, but also austerity. What will, is that like a distinguishing factor of practicing in Latin America? Do you think so? And how far do you think so?
I
I think, as I said in the morning, that to really be sustainable, to really get in projects with the vision and the conscious that we have to be sustainable, we have to care about budget, we have to, even if there is no problem with that, no? But in a way, for me at least, it's much challenging to have something to do with little than having everything that I want to bring, whatever. It comes with the time of today. Now the world is changing, so there is time for us to think with creativity, with taking care of really solving a problem and use what is available. I think it is the most important thing that we have to be conscious today. I just love the work being in that direction.
I just would like to add that, for instance, in Colombia, after we have been such a chaos, but that cities, administrators, mayors, they now know the importance to invest in the landscape. So the budgets have been increased because they know that a park with a library, with a river, with trees, make people more happy, make people more the sense of place, make people to connect, socially to connect. So I do believe that the more we, as a professional, sell the value, the power of the landscape profession, the budgets will be increasing.
Have you seen a sea change happening in these last years? Would you say that?
Have you seen that project that the mayor put $40 million? It's the first time a mayor said that big amount can be for a park. And it's not for infrastructure, it's for greenery, the park, for reclaiming the nature of the site, and for making the living love for the people. So I am very positive about this, but it's our role to promote this concept.
But I think austerity gives more initiative to do creative things, to solve things in a very more inclusive way with the people, because the forces of the people and the time that is so valued is very, very important, more than the budget, a big budget. Maybe projects of low presupuesto can be more effective in a social context than a big budget.
Just wanted to add, in terms of the park we talked about, we have that recent experience of budgets and how, if you have, just to back you up a little bit with the social stance, because at least in Mexico City, the social approval of a project is worth a lot of money because it translates into votes, it translates into a lot of political power. So there's a direct connection between landscape and the social aspect of it and its budget. And sometimes they do approve huge budgets for certain landscape projects just because of the social backing up it has behind it. So I would say it does play, those three things come together through the landscape lens. And also budgets have, in terms of landscape, it's particularly interesting because landscape provides a way of not going towards engineering solutions, which are more costly. So in a way, landscape provides a way to reduce the cost of those budgets. But, and also talks about a different time frame, because there's only so much you can do with tunnels and pumps and, tubes. And landscape provides a different way of interaction with communities that actually become important. And I think that's part of the reason why landscape is becoming such a huge lens in Latin America specifically.
But still, the engineer is gaining territory because the budget is, they don't have the confidence to do all the solutions with the landscapes. So still in our countries, the engineering solutions still more important and more budget for them. So we are still in a first stage.
I just wanted to follow in what Elena was saying, and I think that there is a link between austerity and diversity that landscape brings to the table, which I think that is very valuable and very important. So landscape deals with nature and the diversity that exists in nature, including humans. And we humans, if we really think about ourselves as part of that, actually, as we learned with Donna Haraway, we are like 2% of human cells. The rest are fungi and bacteria and everything else. So we are part of a larger compound that we need to understand in all its diversity. And that, I think, that is a very important lesson in terms of the way that landscape architecture can play such an important role in having more more public spaces, but real public spaces. That can have the presence of everything, from the marginal to, to the super wealthy. And I think that somebody really taught us a very important lesson in Brazil was Burle Marx, in terms of like his research, discovering all these different tropical species that he incorporated into these spaces that were taking out of the demolition of all these mountains that initially the state was thinking about these spaces for the development of super wealthy condominiums, and ended being, thanks God, these wonderful parks that everybody can enjoy. So I think that there is a very important role that landscape is called to have in the future of our cities.
So what about the so-called support classes? So this is a question for all the educators on the panel. The so-called support classes that in typical, let's say, landscape faculties, you would be teaching in terms of landscape ecology, so parts of the sciences, parts of art, and parts of history. Are these classes also part of the curriculum in the architecture schools? Can you build upon them when you teach your studio classes? Or is this still something where you would hope for more support in a way? And would that even make sense in the Latin American context and so forth?
No, it definitely does. And I mean, all these support classes are what build the culture of the person that's learning landscape or architecture, in a sense. So I think that's the good thing of universities, in that sense, that you're able at some point of your career to choose, like you were saying archaeology, or you were saying medicine, and you somehow start building upon that the interest that you are trying to pursue. So, well, I think that curriculum is what really makes it stronger, and also what makes it somehow be able to respond to the determined sites many times where the school is situated, no? Because it also takes a lot from where you are. No, in UNAM, it has to do a lot with geography, geology, and engineering. So there are many engineers and sociologists into the Department of Landscape. And here it's more on the ecology and the arts, no? And so then you have like this kind of architects that are more into one thing, responding to the problem of where the school is, that in the end schools are for solving real problems, no? In the, no?
Yes. Well, I don't remember if I mentioned it in the presentation, but I currently teach in a school of design, so it's not even a school of architecture. And I teach a large-scale design. So, for example, some of the games that they were showing is a way to make them do the step from what is an object to what is a large-scale understanding of a context. Yes, and I also teach to business students that study innovation and design. And there, like, I teach them landscape representation and this landscape understanding, trying to explain that basically what they are designing is not an object or a solution, but they are designing an environment. So they need to understand what are the externalities of this environment, where do the materials come from, how do they affect the people that they're working. And in this sense, like, for example, landscape representation, like mapping, diagrams, their change over time, has proved to be really powerful in teaching business students even to understand like the reality in which we live.
Well, I think that I would love to say something that is connected to this, and is that I'm really celebrating your initiative of trying to put together, all these kind of different people working from different perspectives. I think that we need to have more dialogues of this time. We need to really be able to talk across disciplines, like, from a historian to a practitioner to somebody that is really working on policies, or, we are doing very little of that. If there is something that I enjoy about my work at RISE, is that beside training PhD students in the history of architecture at RISE, I teach a very diverse group of undergraduate students, mostly from the architecture school, but many of them are majors in bioengineering or environmental studies or Latin American studies. And that necessity of finding a common language for communicating and for investigating the same things is really the best experience that I ever had in the academy, I will say.
I have a question. It's just something that has come to my mind from the presentations today. But there was another former president of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, Jeffrey Jellicoe, who in the 1960s, I think it's maybe 1963 or so, said that landscape architecture was not a sufficient term for what landscape architects actually do. And let's think of a new term, preferably a single word that could be used among various different regions and languages. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
What the word would be?
Not necessarily what the word would be, but more about the idea. Can landscape be reduced to a single word that has a universal application? Or, are there sort of a multitude of approaches and a multitude of words? Or I'm just wondering, do you have a position?
That's a very good question. It will take us for 2 years to respond.
Sure. We have time.
In IFLA, during the term I was president, we tried to define the profession because we want to go to the international ILO, the International Labor Office in Switzerland, to put the role of the landscape architects at the same level as the architects and the planners. And such a terrible work. We make a committee. If you want to delay things, make a committee. So we put a committee, and in that committee there were the Latins, Italians, French, Spanish, and Latin America. We also have the Anglo-Saxon, the English, Landschaft, the Germans. And it was such a very complex discussion because the Latin word of paisaje, it says a lot. It comes from peace and from people. But Landschaft in German is very concrete. And in English, landscape design, it's also very concrete. So at the end, the discussion goes, so we put into the ILO definition a very long one and a shorter one. The shorter one comes from ASLA and Landscape Institute and the German landscape architects. And the longer one comes from the Latin members. So, but it's a very, very good question. We have discussed in Colombia, if we change the name, let's put off the architect. Let's say we are landscape designers. That will be more broad. Actually, I was educated in England, which is landscape design, is the master degree, but not landscape architect. So I agree with you. We have to work on that. The definition, it takes another 20 years, maybe.
Do we have any other positions? or suggestions? Well, maybe we can open it up to the audience if we have any questions, concluding remarks.
Hi, I'm Camila from Bogota, Colombia, and I wanted to know, to both Marta and Diana, but to the rest of you as well, how can landscape, now that we're in the peace treaty and getting the guerrillas to come into cities and to be reincorporated into the communities, what the role of landscape can be to really start creating cohesive communities between people that have been part of one side or the other, and how, like, the role of landscape in this moment in Colombia.
I tried to talk a little bit in my talk about rurality, that we are being concentrated in thinking about cities and the nature of cities and the resilience in cities and everything in cities, and we forgot about rurality and the majority of population that has come to the city comes from the rural areas. So I think we have to concentrate a lot on the work on the rural areas, the agriculture, the traditional practices, and that where the people wants to go back to work in their land, to recover the soul of what they were, no, the identity, because in the cities they are like in a place of that they want to recover that thing that links them, and there's a lot of work, because all the rivers, the mountains are the links that brings together the communities. So I think we have to concentrate in that, and the government is not doing a very good, efficient work, because they are putting the people from the guerrilla in anywhere without the minimum of dignity, of places to work together. So I think we have to move universities to the rural areas. We need to go to the ground to see the reality. And I was talking about that to a group of students, and we have a very big responsibility.
And complementing that question, this is April, the World Landscape Month, which celebrate the good practices of the profession worldwide. And in Colombia, following Diana's statement, the Colombian Society of Landscape Architects with the Universidad of Salle are going to do a symposium which is called the Landscape and Territories of Peace, how the landscape architects can help to build this new paradigm of cohesion, unity among that people and the rest of the population. A very good question for us.
I really want to thank all of you because I had so many different and interesting points of views on architecture, landscape architecture. As just a candidate for Bachelor of Architecture, it's really interesting for me to see it from a totally different point of view. And now I actually can't see a border between landscape and architecture so clearly. But actually my question was a bit connected with the term of landscape architecture. I was just sitting here and I thought, what if there is no land? So, for example, I'm not for so long time in Boston, and yesterday I was in East Boston for the first time, and I came up with the idea there is no trees, no land, there's basically no place to develop something. So, have you ever faced this problem when there is no land? I mean in a city.
No, I don't know if I understand it correctly, but for example, in Mexico City is almost all built. So there's no free land, no, if you want to see it from that point of view. There's no free land, so in order to make a denser city, houses or single-family houses are being removed and then multi-family buildings are being built. Or in that sense, it's how the city is changing and mutating all the time. And somehow that's, from the urban design and landscape point of view, what we are trying to do is how you re-understand public space and how public space can bring more solutions that the ones that it actually brings. So that's where landscape, I think landscape takes a position, no? Because we try to understand what are the characteristics of the ground, what's the service that this ground can give to the city, and then try to build upon that. So somehow we build where there is no free land, but there's still land, no, occupied land.
And landscape is everything, no? It's the histories in the territory, and the life, the nature that is in the cities is everywhere, no? The sky, the water, every little thing. So we have a lot of nature in the cities, even though we didn't see it so so specifically. So we need to make another kind of focus when we think there is no land to do. No, there's a lot of opportunities because there's another kind of life, another kind of nature, and there's landscape that is reflecting the story of that place.
Hi, thank you everyone. Today was a very special day. I'm part of the organizers with the Latin GSD and Women in Design. And there are so many things that I want to say, but perhaps just to, I don't know if there is a question, but just more of a general comment. I think it was very important what Sonia mentioned before about the scarcity of this austerity, going back to that topic. And I see a lot of talent in Latin America in general, and I think it's because we're not being very precise in telling why. It's because aesthetics is not a thing. I mean, when you have a big budget, you can do also things that are silly in terms of aesthetics. You're adding things that you don't really need, and I was impressed by the sublime landscapes from Teresa, that she really knows how to work with a a lack of materials, the same way that Ana Maria was showing, the archaeology. We are defined by that history of the archaeology and Mexican ruins and the Incas and so many that use a single material, stone, and that knew how to control or domesticate the topography, and you only have two actions, one material and one way to work with the landscape. And to me, what Teresa showed, and you being very humble, but it's because your austerity becomes to the point to become poetic. And I think that's also important to mention. And as another thing, I think is, we mentioned last night, and someone asked you during the dinner, if having already 30 years in practice, how much you have changed, or how much your mind has changed. And you mentioned, well, in fact, I feel that I haven't changed a lot. She has the idea of the line behind her head, and many of you, I'm interested in then opening the question for the younger generations. You also have noticed that we brought more established, a more established generation, but also we were interested in knowing, how is the work that Janet, Lorena, Loretta are starting to do through academia and research and all that. And how much do you think your mind is going to change in 20 years, in 30 years, and how much that you have already, you have a very established practice. How do you feel about it? Have you changed? It's open to everyone. I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. But.
Yeah, I'm going to answer because she gave me this question yesterday, and I found it so interesting to look at my projects and my work, and she asked me, would you do the same? And I don't know, I think it's great or it's terrible, but I would do exactly the same again. So it's so much inside myself, the answers I give for the projects, for the landscape I have. And I always say another thing is, if somebody asks, what did you do here? Because it looks like there was nothing done. Everything looks so much like it was obviously there before. I feel totally happy because this is what I look for. Is my work is to have the place done for everybody, prepared for everybody to be, and not to mark it with something that they will say like it was done by somebody. And about the budget, I also wanted to go again on that. It's like I look for doing what is exactly needed for that place, not more. Not to bring ornaments, not to bring anything that doesn't bring something that is needed to the place. So if you have a huge budget, then you get to do things that were not necessary, and you lose the opportunity to be so much sustainable, so much serious about the project, about the place, about the people. So thank you for the question.
Well, I guess for me, what I see myself learning more and more is how to, exactly what you mentioned, how to edit, how to synthesize better, how to understand the site much better. Because I work in Latin American context, I work in Mexican context, which is budgets are always an issue, and you always need to edit more and more and more. And I guess that comes with practice. When I'm never like happy with the result in a way that I feel that there's always more editing. And we were talking yesterday about the park and how we could have done a different type of project. And I mean, it is what it is, and you do it in the best way. But I think there's a lot to learn from that synthesis and that editing of a lot of knowledge from our discipline, but also other disciplines, until you get to those types of projects that are beautiful. Hopefully, one day.
Well, in my case, I hope I will continue doing what I'm doing because I really love it, like to try to be challenged by the context and understanding at different scales and who are the actors that are relevant and how can we intervene in this field. A bit, I guess, like Elena and Loretta, my work has been at the very beginning, like working on something that had already been set up. I mean, as everybody that maybe has worked in an office or has worked in a research project that was ongoing. And in these 3 years in Chile has been about setting up the project. And of course, now I have a lot to learn on how this gets implemented. Like, how do you bridge the gap between having an idea or a proposal and seeing that the communities or the client or whatever is interested, but from there to make it really happen and to implement it and that it actually works. I guess it's a big way to go still. But
do any of the other organizers have any sort of closing remarks you would like to make? Because you've put so much work into to making making the day happen.
Tough question. I don't know. Again, thank you so much for being here for us. Like we spent a lot of time thinking of this project and seeing all of you guys here. It's such a tremendous pleasure. And I don't know. I've been thinking towards the day and the role of landscape architecture, and I don't know if I misunderstand. But it seems like that we have the possibility of I don't know. I was hearing Ana Maria this morning and the relationship with extraction and how the relationship of United States and Latin America have changed in history. And I don't know if we're in a point where we can use landscape architecture as almost as a revolution, you know, and to really change structures of power and structure of the way that we deal with nature and we deal with the growth of cities, and I don't know what especially you, Ana Maria, have to say about this. What are the next steps for landscape urban architecture and not as yes. What are the next steps? Well, what are your ideas of what's going to happen in 30 years, and if we can use these tools as really to make super big changes.
So as you guys can see, I can't be silent. A lot of things are going on in my head, so that's why I'm not speaking. Because one thing that emerged, just listening to all of you and the questions, is the issue that I think that nature as a concept is unifying, and it has a huge power in that regard. But it's not that simple. And on the one hand, I was thinking about the differences that I have encountered between the way the environmentalist movement approaches nature in the north versus the south. Here, there's a huge debate between environmentalism per se, which is perceived as a middle-class white movement, and more related to the notion of conserving beautiful nature and devoid of humans. The issue of racism that you touched upon is critical to the conversation. And on the other hand, you have the environmental justice movements, which are precisely vindicating the idea that the negative externalities of development are not being distributed equally across societies in the north and across races and ethnicities in the north. These things are all new to me, like learning that, for example, Black and Hispanic communities in Los Angeles have suffered, and I say Black on purpose, I don't say Afro-American, to vindicate the value of Blackness. But to learn that they have suffered from these externalities much more, you know, that the toxic factories are in their neighborhoods, has been shocking to me. You know, that's when you realize that environment is a political ground, is a socially charged ground, and it's not just the space for consensus that we want to think it is, as it is maybe in Latin America. In Latin America, the environment is socially charged from the beginning,
because as we extract, we're displacing people. You see it in the news in all countries. Every day, the communities demanding justice because they have been displaced, because the land was concessioned to an extraction company, and we have all these like contested power relations going on. So for us, it has always, landscape has always been like a socially charged and politically charged project. So in that sense, I think there's a bit of a difference between North and South. I've noticed that in the text of landscape architects, the word social landscape comes up over and over again. Paisaje cultural, paisaje social, but it's not like the cultural landscape of UNESCO. It's different. It's this like socially charged, informal area, or I feel like really honestly, because Venezuela and Ecuador are so polarized right now, we're still living the Cold War, we still speak in terms of right and left. I feel that landscape does have the power to bring us together in the sense that the right and the left may agree on the notion of a park. Mm-hmm. That's something that nobody questions, and that's something where right and left, these two groups in Latin America that have been killing each other since, when did our civil war start? After the Second World War, not much later than that. So I feel that there is a role for landscape to play in terms of peace agreements and bringing this polarization to these cracks that you were mentioning, where these oppositions dilute. So the role of landscape architecture, the way I see it, is absolutely critical in the political moment that we're living right now. I mean, not that the US is very different right now. There's a huge polarization around the figure of Trump. In that sense, I feel that we can connect in that political sense as well and have a dialogue. So I don't know, maybe landscape does have, if it's socially minded, does provide a platform for much more than simply designing green infrastructures. It can play a larger role, and I think it has to play that larger role. Also, as global warming stands, landscape architects have a lot to say in that regard as well.
I think we have another comment or question.
Yeah. Hi. So this is kind of a not fully formed thought, but I just want to thank all of you for coming. Part of our organization of this event, we didn't want to put women in the title because we invited you all here for your obvious skill and talent and all the work that you've done. But I do want to point out that we're sitting in front of 8 fantastic women from Latin America. And I kind of want to return back to what Sonia was talking about in the beginning of your role as women in Latin America and how that's helped you shape landscape architecture in your countries. And this is more of just a thought and comment and celebration. But I also, if I were to pose it as a question, is what do you feel your role is as a woman?
Maybe I can add something to that before you answer. As somebody who's very much more familiar with the Italian context, which probably somehow feeds into some of the, at least immigrants, to some of the Latin American countries, in the 1930s, under the fascist regime, Benito Mussolini tried to make sure that it was architects who were in charge of the landscape. And in part, that was a masculinist stance, obviously, that he was taking. So the architect, the quintessential architect, was a male figure, and he was to impose upon nature, and it was only considered opportune for architects to design gardens or any type of larger landscape. Now, we know that there were women amongst those people who were actually active in shaping and forming the landscape, but they obviously had to resist the regime at the time. And so there's an interesting story that is actually coming out of that, because in Italy, There are, as of now, I mean, there is an Italian Association of Landscape Architects, but there is no training institution per se that offers, and Jeanette, correct me if I'm wrong, I might not be at the latest stage of developments in Italy, but there's not per se a landscape architecture program as the ones that we know of in the United States or in other countries.
Yeah, that is at the level of masters.
Sorry?
At the level of masters, you can take a degree in architecture and then
Right.
master in a few institutions. Like General, for example, has one, but it's just
Right.
final part.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And so basically that has carried forward in a way, so it's a very interesting history to look at. And so in a way, I'm seeing some of, or bits of this maybe mirrored in the story that we're seeing here today, where all of you have architecture degrees, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is it, right? Anyways, but I think back to the question that Alexandra posed.
I was wanting to take your idea about what is happening in the polarization of the ideas, and that the green parks should be a place where nobody could debate. But we are still in our cities debating about the green areas, as I put an example of this debated zone about if it's a reserve or not in the plateau of Bogota. And I think, like I was thinking about, as a citizen and a woman maybe, we as women could be the ones that have to make an agreement, to make more acuerdos, to make conciliations, no? To try to give an idea of what could be possible. And I think women have this capacity of trying to bring into this discussion and to bring in agreements and to bring in other solutions or other possibilities that the ones that maybe are the straight that somebody have or very polarized, that as I see in our city.
I just add one sentence. We are multi-proposite gender because we can do many things at the same time. Men, no, only one. Another thing which can add to this is the doors open to a woman. Never, never, ever a door is closed to a woman. Because we are soft, because we like to smile, we like to talk to the other that you are wonderful. So that kind of a very, very enamorado, ¿cómo se dice? Tranquilo, not imposed way help us to deal, to conciliate with the others. Yes, I do. Yes.
Do we have any other voices? I'm sure we have many more voices here in terms of how we deal with things as women. But, okay.
Hi, my name is Gabriela. I'm from Puerto Rico. I graduated from here a year ago. And I actually come from a background in my bachelor's in architecture, and I have a master's in landscape architecture here and another in urban design. I think it's interesting that all of you come from the discipline of architecture, and in a way, it makes me think about the future of design schools in general, and thinking about the future of the different disciplines and in the way we think about design and cities and the environments we provide for people. And it is a common thing in all of your work that you're responding to our current problematics, and in some way the discipline of landscape, in my experience, because I did study it, what I think it gave me while I was doing it is this sensibility to look at things in a more holistic way. I think maybe sometimes we mistake landscape as just being nature and this beautiful thing but a lot of the work that is being done in landscape today is happening in cities, and it's not green or natural or precious. My last year here, I took a course and it was on historic urban landscapes. And actually UNESCO just came out with this new definition. And I think it's very interesting to look at landscape in that sense, because they're talking about conservation in the terms of recognizing the heritage of the places we're working in, and that includes not only the built environment, but also that intangible qualities and the people and their cultures and all of the things that are part of this whole that we call, I don't know what, again, with the definitions and the word, I think it might be interesting to think that maybe in the future, the way we teach architecture or landscape or urban design is going to be a little bit more streamlined, in the sense that we're going to be taught in a way to think about it, and then you won't have to graduate and then go into, or maybe we have water problems, we have to solve it and figure out a way. But in academia, like, maybe we'll already be doing it in a more cohesive way between disciplines. I don't know.
Thank you. Ana Maria, did you want to comment on something?
I just wanted to make a brief comment on the gender issue, because it is important, and I understand that it's hard to discuss gender without embarking ourselves in stereotypes. Stereotyping is very dangerous. I consider myself a very masculine woman. In my next life, I want to be gay. I don't want to be a woman again. Believe me, it's too tough, too much work, too many barriers. But I do not want to be an hetero guy either. Sorry, I apologize. I love men. But, and I think it's because in my subconscious, I think that's the ideal condition. It's like, it is tough, so all I can tell the young, wonderful ladies who are here studying, becoming landscape architects, and, you're going to go out into the world, you will face immense obstacles, but you will find wonderful men who will support you, who are gender blind, and you will find wonderful women who will support you, who are gender blind. Just look for those people and stick to them. You will also find those who are not gender blind, who will make very nasty comments like, what is a woman doing in this meeting? And then suddenly you look around and you realize you're the only woman and you hadn't noticed because you're gender blind. And you're like, what are you doing in this meeting? I told you I'm a very masculine woman. So I tend to be very aggressive when I get discriminated like that. But it is important, because I feel that in my own trajectory, being a woman has taken me through the cracks. Because it was so tough to follow the common pathway. It's like you had to be the whole time jumping around the obstacles and thinking, I don't want to be this violent woman always trying to defend my space, who gets, can you get me the coffee, please? And then you realize again you're the only woman in the room, and you're like, have you heard about self-service? Excuse me. But those things will happen to you. So get ready. And the cracks are the spaces through which we bloom. So that's our nature, that's our force, just with landscape architecture. And maybe my affinity with it, that's come from that, impulse of finding a niche for life and for blooming. In spite of all the concrete that may be above you, you will prevail. Just be strong and be like those trees that grow in the cracks.
I would like to say, So it's all about revolution, and thank you very much to the organizers again. Thank you to all our speakers. It has been a great pleasure getting to know you and learn from you, and I hope you have a good journey back, and first of all, a good time here in Cambridge. So I hope to see many of you again next week, and goodbye, and thank you again. Thank you.